They pointed a gun at my daughter, Sarah, the one who briefs generals, the one who leads teams into situations that would make seasoned operators blanch, the one whose calm under pressure is a goddamn force of nature. And this Barney Fife knockoff, this puffed-up HOA enforcer with a cheap vest and an even cheaper badge, had the gall, the unmitigated, suicidal audacity to level a weapon at her. The memory still sends a jolt of ice and fire through my veins. He thought she was trespassing. On my property, coming to see her old man. The sheer, unadulterated stupidity of it all was breathtaking, a monument to petty tyranny. He didn't know. He couldn't possibly have known he was threatening special agent in charge, Sarah Jennings, FBI hostage rescue team, a woman who could field strip him and his weapon with her eyes closed and one hand tied behind her back before he could even register a coherent thought. But in that frozen second, as his shaky hand tightened on the grip of his sidearm, he was just a threat. And threats to my daughter, well, they tend to resolve themselves with a swiftness that is both beautiful and terrifying to behold. The peace of our little cul-de-sac, a peace I'd fought for after a lifetime of my own battles, was about to be shattered, not by some external evil, but by the festering rot of an HOA president with delusions of grandeur and his overzealous, underqualified goon squad. They had no idea the hornet's nest they were kicking. They had no idea that this wasn't just a house. It was my house. And she wasn't just a visitor. She was my daughter. And I wasn't just some retired guy tending his roses. They were about to learn a very hard, very public lesson about overreach, about underestimation, and about the sacred bond between a father and his child. The air crackled, not with the threat of his cheap firearm, but with the promise of impending righteous obliteration. He had no idea he'd just signed his own warrant, not for arrest, but for a dismantling so thorough, so legally precise, it would become a cautionary tale whispered in HOA meetings for generations. The calm before the storm wasn't just a metaphor. It was the deceptive quiet of Sarah, assessing, processing, and preparing to act. And I was right there, watching the fool step onto a landmine he couldn't see. The gun, pointed at my little girl. My little girl. The world narrowed to that single, intolerable image. The confrontation had escalated with the speed of a runaway freight train, all because of an ornamental gnome. Not even mine, mind you. It belonged to Mrs. Henderson 3 doors down, a tiny ceramic fellow with a fishing rod, deemed non-compliant by the HOA's newly minted aesthetic Gestapo, led by none other than President Brenda Millstone, a woman whose primary source of joy seemed to be the misery of others. Sarah had parked her decidedly nondescript sedan, the kind that screams government issue if you know what to look for, and was walking up my driveway, a bag of my favorite coffee beans in hand. That's when Officer Dwayne Duke Bullard, Millstone's prize recruit, intercepted her. Duke was a local legend in his own mind, a mall cop washout who'd found his calling as the HOA's muscle. He was built like a badly packed sausage casing, all ego and cheap polyester. He'd accused Sarah of suspicious loitering, then trespassing on HOA common property, when she'd stepped on the grass verge that technically, by some arcane HOA bylaw, wasn't mine. The argument was ludicrous, manufactured. I'd come out onto the porch, drawn by the raised voices, just in time to see Duke's face flush a dangerous puce. "You're not authorized to be here," he'd bellowed, spittle flying. Sarah, ever the professional, had simply stated, "I'm visiting my father." Her voice was calm, level, the kind that de-escalates, Or, in the case of idiots like Duke, enrages them further because it refuses to acknowledge their inflated authority. That's when he'd unholstered his weapon, a cheap, probably illegally modified pistol. "You're coming with me. You're under arrest for trespassing," he declared, his voice cracking with a mixture of fear and excitement. "Arrest my daughter for visiting me." The coffee beans tumbled from Sarah's hand, scattering across the concrete. That's when he pointed the gun at her chest. Time stopped. My own training, decades dormant, surged. But Sarah was faster. Before I could even take a step, there was a blur of motion. It wasn't a fight. It was a clinic. A fluid parry. A wrist lock that must have sent jolts of agony up Duke's arm. A pivot. And then Duke was face down on my driveway, his cheek pressed against the scattered coffee beans, his weapon skittering harmlessly away. Sarah had one knee in the small of his back, his arm cranked to an impossible angle. "Weapons secured," she said, her voice still unnervingly calm, though I could see the flicker of controlled fury in her eyes. "Dad, call 911. Report an armed individual impersonating an officer and assault with a deadly weapon." The transition from beloved daughter to tactical commander was instantaneous, seamless. Duke was groaning, a pathetic, wheezing sound. The neighborhood, previously hidden behind twitching curtains, began to emerge, drawn by the commotion. The HOA enforcer was now just a whimpering fool with a face full of my favorite dark roast. The first act of this farce was over. The real battle was just beginning. The arrival of actual, uniformed law enforcement was a study in contrasts. 2 local deputies, young but professional, assessed the scene with practiced eyes. Duke, still attempting to bluster from his prone position about HOA authority and citizens' arrest, was quickly and efficiently cuffed once Sarah identified herself, calmly producing her FBI credentials. The sight of that gold badge seemed to suck the remaining fight out of Duke, his face paling to a pasty gray. The deputies were respectful, almost deferential to Sarah, recognizing a level of operational expertise far exceeding their own daily grind. One took Duke to his cruiser, while the other took Sarah's statement, and then mine. I watched Brenda Millstone, HOA president extraordinaire, arrive in a huff, her face a mask of indignation. She'd clearly been alerted by one of her network of busybodies. "What is the meaning of this?" Officer Bullard was performing his duties. She shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at Sarah. "That woman assaulted him!" The deputy, a young man named Miller, turned to her with an expression of weary patience. "Ma'am, Mr. Bullard pulled a firearm on this lady, who is a federal agent. He's lucky he's not on his way to the morgue. And as for Officer Bullard, his sidearm appears to be illegally modified, and we'll be looking into his security license, if he even has one." Millstone's jaw worked silently, her face flushing crimson. The delicious, schadenfreude-laced humiliation was just beginning to simmer. The deputies were thorough, professional. They photographed the scene, collected Duke's weapon, which, as Deputy Miller suspected, looked like it had seen better days and some questionable garage gunsmithing, and took contact information from the now gathering crowd of curious neighbors. Many of them looked stunned. A few looked hopeful. They'd all suffered under Millstone's petty reign. The endless stream of violation notices for trash cans left out an hour too long, for the wrong shade of beige on a mailbox, for children's laughter deemed excessive. Now they saw a crack in the fortress. Sarah, meanwhile, was already shifting gears. "Dad," she said quietly, once the initial police business was concluded and Duke was being driven away, presumably to a very uncomfortable holding cell, "we need to talk to your attorney. And I need to make some calls. This HOA, its security, its finances, I have a feeling there's more here than just an idiot with a gun. Her eyes, sharp and analytical, scanned the perfectly manicured lawns, the identical houses, a superficial tranquility that clearly hid something uglier. The bitingly sarcastic thought that these people wouldn't know a real threat if it served them tea was almost too easy. They'd created a monster in Duke, and now that monster had bitten back not on a resident, but on the one person equipped to dismantle their entire rotten edifice. The federal gravitas she carried, usually veiled, was now subtly on display. The game had changed. This wasn't just about an assault anymore. This was about systemic abuse of power. And Sarah, well, she specialized in dismantling systems that had gone rotten. The next morning, the air in my kitchen was thick with the smell of strong coffee and tactical planning. Sarah was on a secure line, her voice low and clipped, a cascade of acronyms and call signs I only vaguely understood. I was on my laptop, pulling up every piece of HOA documentation I'd ever received. Bylaws, meeting minutes, financial statements I'd mostly ignored until now. The micro-injustices, the endless stream of petty fines and warnings, suddenly coalesced into a larger pattern of harassment and potential fraud. "Got it," Sarah said, hanging up. "Internal Affairs at local PD is already interested in Duke's history. Apparently, this isn't his first dubious rodeo. And my contact at the State Licensing Board for Security Personnel has no record of a Dwayne Bullard or Duke Security Services being licensed for armed work. If he is licensed at all, it's for observing and reporting, not playing Wyatt Earp." A grim smile touched her lips. "He's in a world of trouble, assault with a deadly weapon, impersonating an officer, brandishing, illegal firearm modifications. The DA is going to have a field day." I nodded, highlighting a section in the HOA's latest financial disclosure. "And look at this. Security services rendered, a line item for $10,000 last quarter. Paid to whom? There's no company name listed, just a recurring payment. Probably to Millstone's personal slush fund, or directly to Duke under the table," Sarah mused, peering over my shoulder. Her finger tapped the screen. "We need to get a look at their full, unredacted financials, and their insurance. I'd bet my pension they're not insured for armed guards, especially unlicensed ones." That's when my friend and lawyer, Tom Ashton, arrived. Tom was a retired JAG officer, sharp as a tack, and possessed a bulldog tenacity when it came to legal battles. He'd been my golfing buddy for years, and he'd heard the preliminary story from me late last night with a mixture of outrage and what I can only describe as legal glee. "Morning, folks," he said, accepting a mug of coffee. "Heard you poked the hornet's nest. Or rather, the hornets poked an FBI tactical commander. Bad move for the hornets." He grinned. "Okay, lay it on me. We've got assault, false imprisonment, potentially RICO if there's financial shenanigans and a pattern of intimidation." Sarah laid out her findings: the lack of licensing, the potential for insurance fraud, the questionable payments. I added the years of petty harassment, the culture of fear Millstone had cultivated. Tom listened intently, his eyes narrowing. "Brenda Millstone," he said, a thoughtful frown on his face. "I know that name. Had a few run-ins with her professionally when she was on the town council. Ambitious, ruthless, thinks rules are for little people. Perfect, I thought. A villain with a history." Tom's smile was all teeth. "All right, step 1. Sarah, your official statement is gold. We get that to the DA, press for maximum charges against Bullard. Step 2. Civil suit. Against Bullard for assault, battery, emotional distress. Against the HOA for negligent hiring, negligent supervision, creating a hostile environment, and potentially violating its own bylaws regarding security provisions. We subpoena their financials, their meeting minutes, every email Millstone has ever sent regarding enforcement." He paused, looking at me. "And you, my friend, you start talking to your neighbors. Quietly. Find out who else has been improperly fined, threatened, or harassed. We build a chorus of complaint. Millstone thinks she's a queen. We're about to show her she's ruling a kingdom of sand." The plan was clear, a multi-pronged assault. Legal, criminal, and a quiet rebellion from within the ranks of the oppressed homeowners. The controlled fury I felt was now channeled, focused. This wasn't just revenge. This was about restoring order, about accountability. The taste of that impending victory was already sweeter than the coffee. Our offensive began with surgical precision. Tom Ashton, true to his word, filed a blistering civil complaint that landed on Brenda Millstone's doorstep with the impact of a stun grenade. The language was legally lethal, citing negligence, endangerment, and a litany of HOA bylaw violations that Millstone herself had likely authored and then ignored. Simultaneously, Sarah's detailed report, coupled with her official FBI status, had galvanized the district attorney's office. Dwayne Duke Bullard found himself facing a raft of felony charges that would likely put him away for a significant period, especially given his prior, shall we say, informal interactions with law enforcement that Sarah's contacts had unearthed. My role was quieter, but no less crucial. I started with Mrs. Henderson, the owner of the offending gnome. A sweet, elderly widow, she'd been terrified into paying a $100 fine she couldn't afford. When I explained what had happened with Sarah and that we were fighting back, a spark ignited in her soft eyes. "Oh, that Brenda," she'd whispered. "She's been a terror since her husband passed and she got on that board. Finding me for my Herbert." She gestured to the now absent gnome, said he lowered property values. She then recounted a dozen other petty tyrannies, other neighbors who'd been bullied into compliance. One by one, I visited them. The initial fear was palpable. Years of Millstone's iron-fisted rule had conditioned them to silence. But Sarah's story, the image of the HOA's enforcer, disarmed and humiliated by a woman half his size who turned out to be a federal agent, was a powerful antidote to that fear. It was a David and Goliath story playing out in their own backyard. Slowly, cautiously, they began to share their own stories. Mr. Rodriguez, fined for his son's basketball hoop. The Chang family, cited for wind chimes that were excessively tonal. Young Timmy Evans, whose lemonade stand was shut down for not having an HOA commercial permit. Each tale was a fresh log on the fire of my righteous anger. We found an ally in the HOA treasurer, a quiet accountant named Arthur Jenkins. Arthur, it turned out, had been bullied by Millstone for years, forced to sign off on questionable expenses and consulting fees that often went to Millstone's pet projects, or, as we suspected, her own pockets. Presented with the possibility of being implicated in financial misconduct versus cooperating with an FBI agent and a determined lawyer, Arthur chose wisely. He began discreetly feeding Tom copies of unredacted financial statements, invoices for security equipment that never materialized, and checks made out to cash with vague memo lines. The evidence was mounting, a beautiful, damning avalanche. The visual of those spreadsheets, with their highlighted irregularities, was like a map to Millstone's corruption. Each entry was a nail. The transition was fascinating to watch. Neighbors who once scurried away from Millstone's gaze now met in hushed groups, sharing information, their fear slowly being replaced by a steely resolve. The passive bystanders were becoming active rebels, their whispers turning into a murmur, then a rumble of dissent. The power paragraphs of Tom's legal filings, filled with cold, hard facts and the threat of massive financial penalties, were doing their work. Millstone, I heard, was becoming increasingly erratic, her pronouncements at hastily called and poorly attended board meetings growing more shrill. She didn't know it yet, but her reign was already over. The only thing left was the public execution, the lead-up to the emergency HOA meeting, called by Millstone in a desperate attempt to rally support and paint herself as the victim, was thick with anticipation. Tom had advised us to let her dig her own hole, and she was obliging with gusto, sending out frantic, capital letter-strewn emails accusing outside agitators and disgruntled elements of trying to destroy their peaceful community. The irony was so rich, it was practically dripping. Our tactical plan was simple. Let Millstone speak, let her incriminate herself with her own arrogance, and then, calmly and methodically, dismantle her. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a sterile, beige room that perfectly reflected the HOA's soul-crushing aesthetic. It was packed, not just with Millstone's few remaining sycophants, but with dozens of homeowners who had, until now, suffered in silence. I saw Mrs. Henderson in the front row, a small, determined smile on her face. Mr. Rodriguez was there, the Changs, even young Timmy Evans with his parents. Sarah sat beside me, calm and composed, radiating an aura of quiet authority that seemed to make Millstone visibly uncomfortable. Millstone took the podium, her voice tight with feigned outrage. She launched into a rambling tirade about maintaining standards, the sacred duty of the HOA board, and the unprovoked violent attack on poor Mr. Bullard, who was merely upholding the bylaws. She portrayed Sarah as some sort of rogue element, conveniently omitting her federal credentials. This individual, Millstone spat, gesturing vaguely towards Sarah, refused to identify herself, and then viciously assaulted a dedicated community servant. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder, no longer fearful, but skeptical. The bitingly sarcastic thought that Millstone's grasp on reality was as tenuous as Duke's on his weapon almost made me laugh out loud. When she finally wound down, having painted a picture of herself as a besieged martyr, Tom Ashton rose. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Mrs. Millstone," he began, his tone deceptively mild. "Thank you for that colorful interpretation of events. Perhaps we can clarify a few facts for the residents." He then proceeded, with legal surgical precision, to dissect her narrative. He presented the police report. He mentioned Duke Bullard's multiple felony charges. He highlighted Bullard's lack of proper licensing for armed security work. With each point, a visible wave of shock and anger rippled through the audience. The on-screen text of their faces shifted from apprehension to dawning comprehension, then to outright fury directed at the woman on the stage. Millstone attempted to interject, to bluster, but Tom cut her off with a calm, "I'm not finished, Mrs. Millstone." He then projected copies of the HOA's own bylaws regarding security contractors, clear stipulations about licensing and insurance that had been blatantly violated. Then came the financials, courtesy of the now emboldened Arthur Jenkins, who sat looking relieved. Tom pointed out the exorbitant, undocumented payments for security services, the lack of invoices, the suspicious cash withdrawals. "Where did this money go, Mrs. Millstone?" Tom asked, his voice still quiet, but carrying the weight of an indictment. "To Mr. Bullard, who wasn't legally allowed to carry a gun or make an arrest, or perhaps somewhere else." The room was silent, save for Millstone's ragged breathing. Her carefully constructed facade was crumbling. The power shift was palpable. The tide had not just turned. It was a tsunami about to crash down on her. The climax arrived, not with a bang, but with a quiet, devastating reveal. After Tom Ashton had laid bare the financial irregularities and the gross negligence concerning Duke Bullard, Brenda Millstone was sputtering, her face a mottled mess of rage and panic. "This is slander, Lies! You have no proof, she shrieked, her voice cracking. That was Sarah's cue. She stood, not with aggression, but with an unshakable calm that somehow seemed more menacing than any overt threat. All eyes in the room swiveled to her. Mrs. Millstone, Sarah began, her voice clear and carrying easily to every corner of the clubhouse. You stated I refused to identify myself and assaulted Mr. Bullard. Let's address that. She paused, letting the anticipation build. I am Special Agent in Charge, Sarah Jennings, of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, Hostage Rescue Team. A collective gasp went through the room. You could have heard a pin drop on the cheap linoleum. Millstone's jaw literally dropped. The color drained from her face, leaving it a sickly, waxy yellow. Sarah continued, her tone even. Mr. Bullard, who you identify as your community servant, pointed an illegally modified firearm at me and attempted an illegal arrest after I identified myself as visiting my father, a resident here. Her gaze swept the room, meeting the eyes of the stunned homeowners. He was not licensed to carry that weapon, nor was he authorized to make arrests. His actions constituted aggravated assault with a deadly weapon and impersonation of a peace officer. My response was a standard defensive tactic to neutralize an immediate lethal threat. She then looked directly at me, a flicker of warmth in her eyes before they returned to their professional steel. My credentials were presented to the responding local police officers, who I commend for their professionalism. The implication was clear. Real law enforcement knew who she was. The HOA's fake cop had blundered into a world he didn't understand. The withholding of her full title until this precise moment was a masterstroke of tactical communication. It landed with the force of a physical blow. The residents were now looking at Millstone with open contempt. Mrs. Henderson actually tesked, a sound more damning than any shout. Tom Ashton then stepped forward again, holding a sheaf of papers. And Mrs. Millstone, he said, his voice now carrying a distinct edge of legally lethal triumph, regarding your financial stewardship. We have here copies of checks, authorized by you, for security consultation fees, paid directly into a personal account belonging to Mr. Dwayne Bullard, well above any reasonable rate for unlicensed observation. We also have discrepancies in the budget, flagged by your own treasurer, Mr. Jenkins, who is prepared to testify regarding pressure he received from you to approve these and other questionable expenditures. Arthur Jenkins stood up briefly, gave a nervous nod, and sat back down, looking like a man who'd just shed a tremendous burden. The enemy had become an ally, a crucial domino in Millstone's downfall. The final blow came not from us, but from the back of the room. 2 uniformed officers from the local PD, the same ones who had responded to my 911 call, stepped forward. Deputy Miller spoke, his voice firm. Brenda Millstone, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, misapplication of entrusted property, and potentially aiding and abetting the impersonation of a peace officer. You have the right to remain silent. The rest of his words were lost in the uproar of the residents, a mixture of shock, outrage, and a dawning, fierce joy. Millstone, utterly defeated, slumped as the handcuffs clicked shut. The visual of her, the petty tyrant, being led away in disgrace, was a masterpiece of karmic justice. Her reign of beige terror was over. The aftermath was swift and decisive. With Brenda Millstone facing a battery of criminal charges and Duke Bullard already well on his way to becoming a cautionary tale in the county lockup, the HOA board crumbled. An emergency election was called, and a new slate of residents, led by a visibly relieved Arthur Jenkins and a surprisingly fiery Mrs. Henderson, swept into power. Their first official act was to publicly apologize to me, to Sarah, and to every resident who had been unjustly targeted by Millstone's regime. Their second was to hire a reputable, licensed, and, crucially, unarmed security patrol focused on observation and community liaison, not enforcement. Their third was to commission a full, independent audit of the HOA's finances, with Tom Ashton acting as an advisor. The missing funds, it turned out, were even more extensive than we initially suspected, with Millstone having treated the HOA treasury like her personal ATM for years. Restitution would be sought, though it was unlikely she had much left after legal fees. The civil suit against the old HOA board, or rather its insurance, which was frantically trying to distance itself, was settled quickly and favorably. The funds going to repair the financial damage Millstone had wrought, and to a small community improvement fund. My daughter, Sarah, became something of a local legend. The story of the FBI lady who took down the HOA bully was whispered with awe. She, of course, downplayed her role, insisting she just reacted as anyone would to an armed threat. But the quiet pride in her eyes, when she saw the changes in our neighborhood, the basketball hoops back up, the wind chimes singing freely, Timmy Evans' lemonade stand doing a roaring trade with a grand reopening sign, was unmistakable. For me, the sense of boiling anger that had simmered just beneath the surface for so long finally cooled, replaced by a deep, satisfying peace. The systemic humiliation of Millstone wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming our homes, our community, from the clutches of petty despotism. It was about ensuring that no one else would have to endure the kind of microaggressions that, left unchecked, can poison the well of everyday life. We had faced a micro-injustice, a personal violation, and responded with tactical precision and righteous fury, leading to a victory that resonated far beyond our cul-de-sac. The legal warfare had yielded an emotional payoff that was profound. The fear was gone, replaced by a sense of empowerment and unity. Neighbors actually talked to each other again, not in hushed whispers about the latest HOA outrage, but with open friendliness. The destroyed HOA sign, the old one with its long list of prohibitions, was replaced by a simple, "Welcome to Harmony Creek." It was a small thing, but it felt monumental. The ripples of Millstone's downfall spread further than we anticipated. Our little HOA rebellion became a template for other beleaguered communities in the county. Tom Ashton found himself in high demand, consulting with other homeowner groups, looking to oust their own petty tyrants. He joked that Sarah should go on a national tour. HOA, de-escalation, and takedown techniques 101. The local newspaper ran a series on HOA overreach, using our story, with names changed for those who wished anonymity, though many were proud to be identified, as a central case study. It sparked a debate at the state level about HOA reform, about putting checks and balances on these quasi-governmental entities that wielded so much power with so little oversight. Duke Bullard, stripped of his fake authority and facing the grim reality of a lengthy prison sentence, tried to cut a deal, offering to testify against Millstone. But by then, the evidence against her was so overwhelming, his testimony was barely needed. He became a footnote, a pathetic symbol of power abused. Sarah, ever the professional, returned to her demanding job, the incident fading into the background of a life filled with far more significant threats. Yet, when she visited, there was a new lightness about her, a shared understanding between us that went beyond words. We'd faced a domestic skirmish, yes, but it had tested her skills in an unexpected arena and reaffirmed the protective instincts that defined our bond. The emotional gut punch of seeing that gun pointed at her had transformed into a quiet, steely pride in her competence and courage. The memory of her disarming that armed HOA enforcer, so swift, so final, would forever be etched in my mind, a moment of pure, controlled fury channeled into decisive action. The common devices of our fight, the hidden legal documents Tom unearthed, the enemies like Arthur Jenkins who became allies, the tactical legal plan broken into clear steps, the public confrontation where the tide irrevocably turned, and Sarah's dramatically withheld credentials had all played their part in this suburban resistance movement. It was a parental justice fantasy played out in real time. A true crime documentary meets legal warfare with an explosive, triumphant payoff. The visual metaphor of the gavel coming down, not just in a courtroom but in that clubhouse, resonated deeply. Justice, in its many forms, had been served. The final act of this drama played out not in a courtroom or a contentious meeting, but on my front porch months later. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. Sarah was beside me, sipping iced tea, the picture of off-duty relaxation. The sounds of the neighborhood were different now. Children's laughter, the distant clang of Mr. Rodriguez's son practicing free throws, the gentle melody of the Chang family's wind chimes. No more tension, no more furtive glances, just peace. Mrs. Henderson walked by, tending her small flower garden, now boasting a brand new gnome, a cheerful fellow holding a "Welcome Friends" sign. She waved, and we waved back. "You know, Dad," Sarah said quietly. "For a while there, I thought I'd seen every kind of crazy. Cartel bosses, terrorists, rogue state actors. I never figured an HOA president with a Napoleon complex and a mall cop reject would make the list." I chuckled. Life's full of surprises. Mostly, they come in the form of people who crave power they don't deserve and can't handle. True enough, she conceded, a smile playing on her lips, but it was satisfying, seeing them held accountable. Seeing these folks finally breathe free. The morally unshakable core of her, the righteous anger that fueled her dangerous work, was also what made her so fiercely protective of the innocent, whether on a global stage or in a sleepy subdivision. The controlled fury she displayed that day had been a shield for all of us. The experience had, in a strange way, brought our community closer, forging bonds through shared adversity and ultimate triumph. The bystanders were no longer passive. They were engaged, active participants in their own governance. The new HOA board operated with transparency and a genuine desire to serve, not rule. The change was profound. It was a testament to what can happen when people stand up to bullies, especially when one of those people happens to be a hyper-competent underdog with hidden, federally backed authority. The legally lethal precision of Tom's work, combined with Sarah's calm but dangerous intervention, had created a new reality for Harmony Creek. It was a hard-earned peace, a peace that tasted as sweet as the porch coffee we'd shared on so many mornings, plotting the downfall of a petty tyrant. The sunlight on our home seemed brighter now, the shadows shorter. Justice won. As I reflect on the whole sordid, then ultimately uplifting saga, it's the small victories that resonate as much as the big ones. The day Duke Bullard was sentenced, his bluster gone, replaced by a hollow-eyed fear as the judge read out the years he'd spent contemplating his poor life choices. The day Brenda Millstone, out on bail but facing inevitable conviction, had to sell her oversized house to cover her legal fees and restitution. Her reign of terror reduced to a humiliating financial reckoning. The zoom-ins in my mind's eye are not just on legal filings or badges, but on the faces of my neighbors. Mrs. Henderson's quiet joy, Miss Rodriguez's relieved smile, Arthur Jenkins's newfound confidence. These were the true spoils of our war. The narrative had escalated from that shocking micro-injustice of a gun pointed at my daughter, through the personal violation and the immediate tactical revenge, to the systemic humiliation of the antagonist. And through it all, my family, Sarah, had been the emotional core, the unwavering moral compass. Our allies, Tom, Arthur, the once passive residents, had provided the leverage needed to dismantle the rotten structure. The minimalist but sharp dialogue of confrontation had punctuated each power shift, each takedown. The deadpan humor of the situation, an FBI tactical commander versus an HOA goon, had never been lost on us, even amidst the tension. It was a story of underdog vindication, of boiling anger kept just barely in check until it could be unleashed with devastating precision. The power paragraphs of legal filings, the crisp declaratives of Sarah's statements, the occasional poetic reflection after justice was served, it all blended into a narrative of righteous, protective fury and, finally, explosive triumph. This wasn't just an HOA revenge thriller. It was a lesson in community, courage, and the enduring power of standing up for what's right, even if it starts on your own doorstep with a fake cop making the biggest mistake of his life. And if there's a call to arms in all this, it's a quiet one. Don't let petty tyrants steal your peace. Sometimes, all it takes is one person or one family to say, enough, especially if one of them knows precisely how to secure a weapon in a situation, and the other knows how to dismantle an empire of idiocy, one legal filing at a time. The peace we now enjoy is a testament to that. The porch coffee has never tasted better.